morning. Howard Glazer, Director of State Operations for Governor Cuomo of the State of New York. This morning the Governor held a regional storm recovery meeting with our federal, state, and local partners. Very detailed discussion was held with very specific problems discussed. We had with us today Administrator Craig Fugate from FEMA, leading the federal effort for the administration, Senator Gillibrand and Senator Schumer with us. At the local level, all of our regional partners were represented this morning, including County Executive Ed Mangano, Jennifer Waka, who is the Deputy Commissioner at Westchester County, Regina Calcaterra, the Chief Deputy County Executive for Suffolk County, Mayor Bloomberg, Joe Lota, Jerry Howard, who's our Commissioner of Department of Homeland Security, the Governor, and Lieutenant Governors. A very detailed discussion. We have relocated the state apparatus here down to New York City, along with all the commissioners, and FEMA is co-located now here also in New York City with us here at the Governor's office, so very, very close coordination. You hear this morning from the Governor, from Craig Fugate, from the Mayor, and the local officials that are with us. With that, the Governor.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Howard. First, I want to welcome all our regional partners here today, and I want to thank them very much for their outstanding work over the past few days. How they're standing, I don't even know, because most of them have been up 24 hours a day for many, many days, and we're not done yet. But they've been doing outstanding work, and I want to thank them very much for the service and for their collegiality and cooperation. We've worked as a cohesive group, and I want to thank them very much for that. I want to thank Administrator Fugate for today, but more than for today, for the federal government's response from day one. As a former federal official, I hate to say it, but I think this federal government's performance has been extraordinary and better than the performance in these situations than when I was part of a team. So they've really been extraordinary, and I want to thank them. We had a briefing where we went through a number of issues that we've been discussing, more of a focus on the housing, long-term housing situation. It's starting to get cold. People are in homes that are uninhabitable. It's going to become increasingly clear that they're uninhabitable when the temperature drops and the heat doesn't go on. That's when they're going to know they are uninhabitable. People don't like to leave their homes, but the reality is going to be in the temperature. And then we're going to have tens of thousands of people who need housing solutions right away, and a variety of housing solutions, some short-term, some long-term. So designing a system that works for that was a major focus of the briefing. Let me give you a couple of quick updates on the numbers of the situation. On power outages, as of this morning, 730,000 people remain without power. That is down from 2.1 million, so about 1/3 of those who have been without power have been left with power. Where that 730 breaks out is actually interesting. Suffolk has 138,000 people, Nassau 266,000, Westchester 105,000, New York City in total 145, Rockland 42,000, Orange County 20,000. So, and we were making this point to the administrator earlier, this is a regional crisis. If you look at on the numbers, those without power, first it's Nassau County, far and away, 266,000. Then it's New York City. Within New York City, it's 7,000 in Manhattan, it's 12,000 in the Bronx, it's 86,000 in Queens, 20,000 in Brooklyn, and 20,000 in Staten Island. Then we have Suffolk, and then we have Westchester, just in terms of priority. You know, when you remember what this was high winds, not much rain, but not much rain. It was high winds, and it was a tidal surge. So the high winds knocked down the trees. Predominance of trees are Westchester and Nassau, and that's what caused those issues. Tidal surge was Manhattan and the subway system, tunnels, but then the whole shoreline of Nassau, the whole shoreline of Suffolk County all along the South Shore. And Queens, Rockaways, you have Coney Island in there, Long Beach, and you can see go right down the seaboard. So that's where we are going to be focusing. We've made great progress in some parts. The work in Manhattan and the ability for Manhattan and the subway system and the tunnel system to come up has been laudable for sure, but we have much more work to do. And as I am a Queens boy originally, I understand the outer boroughs, and as I now live in Westchester, I understand the suburban communities, and they need help. And while it's nice that power is on for 2/3 of the people, until you have your power on, the problem isn't resolved. This is a very simple situation for people. They flick a switch. If the power is on, the problem is solved, and if the power is not on, the problem is not solved. So I understand all these numbers are nice, but they mean nothing until the power is on in your house, and that's what we're working towards. I've made it very clear, and I will continue to make it very clear to the utility companies that I am going to hold them accountable for their performance here 100%. 100%. On the trains, progress has been very good. As of this morning, trains are running between Brooklyn and Manhattan through the 2 tunnels and 2 bridges. The 2, 3, 4, 5 subways are running under the East River. The D and J trains are running over Manhattan and Williamsburg bridges. The South Ferry Station, which at one time was a large fish tank, has now been pumped dry. This is not to say that service will be normal tomorrow. Service will not be normal tomorrow, and we need you to understand that before you enter the system. A, the volume is going to be way up tomorrow. The schools will be open, and because of the gas problem, you'll have many more people on mass transit, and re-energizing the system has created some obvious mechanical conditions. So we've been in some ways lauding the progress on the subway system, which is merited, but it's not going to be normal tomorrow, and people should expect that. In the Rockaways, where we had tremendous damage on the bridge that carries the A train, what we're going to do there is actually bring the subway cars back to the Rockaways on flatbed trucks and assemble them during the week, because the cars had been taken off the Rockaways before the storm. The bridge is now down, but we'll truck the subway cars to the Rockaways, put that train back together, and then use the train in the Rockaways and a shuttle bus to get to the mainland. That's the situation on the trains. On the fuel, as we've discussed over the past few days, there are continuing issues with the fuel delivery and fuel distribution system. There has been improvement. There will be more improvement. More tankers are coming and barges are coming. The harbor is open. They're being unloaded. They're at the terminals. The pipeline, various system of pipelines that deliver the product are to an extent up and running. There's been some fits and starts that I won't bore you with. So there will be more of a supply of gasoline, and there will be more of a distribution. And there is, as we are now speaking. Today you'll see more distribution. That does not mean there will be a total alleviation of the problem in the immediate future, but it is getting better. We're continuing to monitor the situation literally on a daily basis to increase the supply and the distribution. We do believe it is a short-term problem, but short-term, a number of days, we now anticipate this to continue. And we are not 100% sure when the system will actually be up and running where you won't feel any effect whatsoever. But for now, as we've said to New Yorkers before, patience is required through the entire period, understanding and a little prudence. Now is not the time to be using the car if you don't need to. Now is not the time to be hoarding fuel. You know, sometimes what happens in this situation is people are nervous about getting gas, so they then want to go out and get gas. and maybe at times when they wouldn't normally do it, and that's actually increasing the demand now because the anxiety has gone up and it's increased the demand. So patience and understanding, and we'll monitor it daily. If we need to do additional measures, we will, but right now we want to see the system stabilize, and we believe it will continue to improve, and again, if it doesn't, we have more information, we'll adjust at that time. I want to end by once again thanking my colleagues and thanking this group of elected officials and professionals who have been on response day after day and have done an extraordinary job. All the first responders who have been magnificent and continue to be magnificent. And if there is a silver lining in this truly tragic storm, it is to see New Yorkers come out and come together. It's to see the spirit of community and the spirit of neighborliness. You know, the nation knows New Yorkers as tough, that we're tough. We're tough. We're also sweet, and we're also kind, and we're also generous, and we're also giving. And you can see that all across the state today. I can't tell you how many people I run into who came down from upstate New York, who came in from other states also to try to help, and how neighbors are pitching in to help neighbors. Neighbors who have their own home destroyed, helping someone else dig out their own home. We're a special breed, and I'm proud to be one. With that, let me turn it over to Administrator Fugate for comments.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I got to acknowledge the fact that as you get into the city in many places, it looks like things are back to normal. But people died, and families are grieving. There are homes that won't be repaired. They were destroyed. Families lived in those homes their whole lives. They're asking what's next. As the governor and the officials here had dealt with the initial life-saving and the initial stabilization, our job is to support the long-term recovery. The President made it very clear that we are to be not just leaning forward, but to be here. My deputy administrator has joined up with the governor's team. I've given you some of your New York sons and daughters back. Some of the FEMA officials who grew up here, worked here, that know the community, are leading this response. I find that New Yorkers are much better at helping New Yorkers, sir. So I'm giving you your natives back to you to help you recover. They're native born, they know the communities, they know the issues, and they're going to help get this done. Registration numbers give you some indication of the magnitude, but it never gets down to the losses that people have experienced. But over right now, just here as of this morning, 86,000 households have registered. Again, these are households that have registered for assistance. Already directly deposited in those accounts is $97 million. Thanks to the work of the senators. If you remember last year, there was a lot of questions, did FEMA have the money to respond to Hurricane Irene? Your senators made sure that FEMA had the funds to respond to disasters this year. This will not be a limiting factor on the initial response. As we continue the assessments, however, we know we're going to need a lot of federal programs. So yesterday we had Sean Dunham down here from HUD. We know that housing and affordable housing, and I think you have a governor that has a unique advantage of having run that agency, who probably more than anybody else knows all the tools that the federal government can bring to bear, and will be working closely to address the housing issues. But our commitment here is, you know, all disasters go through cycles, and at some point people are going to think everything's back to normal and that we're done. We don't leave until everything's done. People have long-term housing solutions, the debris is picked up, the repairs are made. This will not be done in months. This will not be done in a year. This is a long-term commitment from the federal government that we come together as Americans to support our citizens in their time of need, and this will continue throughout the recovery process. Governor, officials, Mayor, thank you.
Thank you. Very nicely said, Administrator. Mayor Michael Bloomberg.
There's just two different populations I want to talk about because they're really very different, have different kinds of problems, and some are short-term, some are long-term, some are both. For people who were not living along the coast and did not have the storm surge damage, those are people who lost mass transit, and I think Joe Lhota deserves a lot of credit. I've said it 1,000 times. Mass transit, he'll say it's not all back, but let me tell you, I plan to take the subway tomorrow, and most people will be able to take subways and buses. And it was because they proactively did stuff before that let them recover. They also did a good job in the recovery. Second thing is power. For the vast bulk of people, with the exception of those that got hurt by the storm surge, those people are either back or they are living in areas where the lines are overhead. Con Ed is getting to them, and it will probably take the better part of this week for most of them to get back. But you can see the end of that, and they will be fine. For those that have children in our city, we're going to try to open the schools tomorrow. They are closed on Tuesday, Election Day. We'll have more schools open on Wednesday. You can call 311. We're trying to get to every school to tell you if the school is not going to be open or if we're going to try to bus your children to a different school. People aren't going to like where the schools are that they have to get bused to, but we have to go where there are empty seats. We have buses, some of which got damaged. We have new drivers. They'll have to learn the routes. It is not going to be easy, but I'd rather go through the pain and the annoyance than miss another day of school. Our kids have not had schools for a week, and this is damaging them for their longer term. And then the other thing for the general population is voting. We'll do anything we can to help the Board of Elections. The governor's tried the same thing. This is a system that is not run by the state or by the city, and they have real problems, and we've got to make sure that everybody can vote. It's not going to be easy, but we'll both work hard on that. For those who are in the area where their houses were damaged, where people's lives were taken, that's a very different set of problems, some short-term, some long-term. The short-term, most importantly, hypothermia. You can die from being cold. You can die from fires started when you use candles or stoves to heat your apartment. Please go to the local disaster site. We have, if you don't know where to go, stop a cop in the street and say, please, tell me where to go. They'll help you. But we have to make sure that you are safe for a few days and you have food and water for a few days. Then, the slightly longer term, we've been working with the unions to get electricians and carpenters and boilermakers to help you. The federal government can provide assistance so that you can pay for getting power back in your houses. Some of the bigger buildings, particularly some of the NYCHA buildings, are going to be out of commission for a very long time. The magnitude of the problem is we think we could have something between 30 and 40,000 people that we're going to have to find housing for. We are working on it. We will continue to get this done, and then we've got to make sure that people can get around their communities. The sanitation department is working 24/7, and they've made enormous progress. Please, you don't need stuff that's molding and that can cause fires or spread disease in your home. Put it out in the street. We will pick it up. And lastly, I just wanted to say that Andrew and I aren't working more closely today than we were before, because we've always worked very close together. We just have more contact because there's more to do together. But I can't fault anything that the state has done. I think they've been very helpful to the city, and we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's hear from Senator Schumer, Senator Gillibrand, then we'll go to County Executive Mangano, and then we'll take your questions.
Well, thank you, and let me thank everybody here for their leadership in pulling together. I mentioned yesterday that the federal government has one role and the local and state governments have another. The federal government quite naturally supplies a lot of the resources because the localities just can't afford it on a storm of this magnitude, on a disaster of this magnitude. And the local governments determine where those resources ought to go, local and state government. And in Irene, there were two problems, and the administrator knows this because we talked about them. One, the coordination wasn't that good. It is really much, much better now, as I'm sure people at both ends will tell you, and that is very important. The fact that FEMA will be here at this operations center is a very good thing and will help. Second, in Irene, there weren't the resources. As Mr. Fugate mentioned, the FEMA account has $7.2 billion in it, could get another up to $11.5 billion if needed. Now, at the end of the day, we may need more money than that. My guess is it's likely that we will. The assessments aren't in. But at least initially, money is not holding things back as it did in Irene, where they weren't sure they'd have the resources. In fact, most of the complaints I've heard about FEMA are not the quality of the service, but the quantity. They want more. They want more things from FEMA, and let me go over a couple of those. One, we need more DRCs. Some of you may have seen them. These are the tents that people go to register when their house is in trouble. They get questions asked. The DRCs are sent, they have knowledge. Remember, most of the people in the areas we've seen, whether it be Long Beach or Lindenhurst or Rockaway or Breezy Point or Seagate or Sheepshead Bay, Gerritsen Beach, they don't have phones. They don't have any way to communicate. Many of them do not have access to computers. They either didn't have them or they're washed up. So these tents are really important, these DRCs, and we've requested that there be many more of them quickly. In a city like New York, to say that something's a mile away, that's, 150,000 people away. It's not like in another area, and we need more. We also need more. FEMA has now about 400 people knocking on the doors to tell people where the DRCs are and what they can do. We need many more, again, just because of the magnitude of the problem. I've also asked Administrator Fugate, LIPA, which needs to do a whole lot more, is still owed $55 million from Hurricane Irene, and if they got the money quickly, it would help them get to it more quickly than they have. Because we still have huge numbers of people without power in Suffolk, Nassau, and Rockaway, which is LIPA administrated. We're glad yesterday that FEMA approved C through G, so now all of the local reimbursement has been approved. The governor and I and Senator Gillibrand want to think it has to be higher than the 75% minimum. We'd like it to go to as much as 100%. There is precedent for that in disasters of this magnitude. Let me talk a little bit about fuel, which I've been working with the governor on. I spoke to Secretary Estevez. He's the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Resources. They have now targeted, at the request of the counties and the local governments, 120 gas stations that need either electricity, and they have generators for them, or gasoline, or both. And they hope to have those delivered by this evening. That's where people will be able to get gas. As the governor said, it's not going to be solved in a day, but it should begin to get better and better and better. And with those, they're going to keep doing that. He hopes to have more than 120 gas stations tomorrow, in the next few days. And so once we can get DOD to fill in the gap until all of the fragments in the free market system that were destroyed by the storm, whether it be refineries or pipelines or just basic infrastructure, we think things will be getting better. We know what a disaster this is. My wife waited 2.5 hours for gas and called me every half hour saying, what am I doing about it? So this is an answer to her as well as to all the rest of New Yorkers about that. Some of the pipelines are better. Linden is better. Inwood is now open. That should affect Long Island and Rockaway quite well. And so things are beginning to get better on the gasoline front, but we will keep an eye on that. Final thing I wanted to say, there's a lot of despair, and people have cried in my arms, and I'm sure in all of our arms, about how awful this is, and it is. And when you get on the ground, you go in the air, you see the magnitude of the problem. You get on the ground and you see the depth of it, how people's lives have just been ripped apart by this force of nature. But the best resource we have to fight this is being New Yorkers. I remember after 9/11, a week after 9/11, 5-6 days after 9/11, we thought the southern half of New York would become a ghost town. No one would want to live or work in Chambers Street, that all our big businesses, financial and otherwise, would flee. And what held it all together was the glue of New Yorkers being New Yorkers and saying, we're going to come back bigger and better and ever than before. And that's happening. The lady who Senator Gillibrand and I met on Staten Island the other day, who said, I'm going to die unless you do something. I visited her yesterday. She has food. She has clothing. There is a FEMA center, a DRC, a block from her house at Miller Field. And she's now beginning to put her life back together and get her house done. or get her house, figure out how to get her house done. And then one other person who we met, which just struck me as having the attitude of New Yorkers. There was a fella who has a small little house on Great South Bay in Lindenhurst in Suffolk County. His name was Romano. And we said, "Are you going to come back here?" He said, "Of course. Look at the view. I have 364 great days and one rotten day. Of course I'm rebuilding." And that's New York. And so we should not have any doubt that we will be back, and given the magnitude of this problem, the strength and depth of New Yorkers is even greater. So let's keep the faith, keep on working, and we will prevail.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Gillibrand.
Thank you, Governor. Just want to thank the Governor for his continued leadership and laser-like focus on solving problems, because the problems are extraordinarily deep and difficult. I want to thank the Mayor for his leadership and for all the work he's done to provide relief for families in the city. I want to thank Director Fugate for being here. It means a great deal to New York families that you're here, that you're looking at the problem from the ground, and that will, I think, inform the solutions that you'll put together to provide for these families. I want to thank Senator Schumer for being on the ground from the first minute and being as responsive as possible to every family he meets to make sure they have what they need. What I'm most concerned about right now is the people we haven't met and we haven't seen. And I'm very concerned about our seniors that are homebound. When I was in the Rockaways yesterday, I can tell you in some of the housing there, women would come up to me and start crying because they said, "I'm worried about the old lady down the street or the old lady down the hall. I'm worried that no one's visited her, that we don't know how she's doing." Because sometimes our seniors like to stay at home, and even though they don't have heat or their medicines or food, they are afraid to leave their homes. I want to thank the NYPD because they've been doing a great job in trying to make sure we don't have looting, to make sure our communities are safe, to watch the gas lines. So I want to thank Commissioner Kelly and all of the police force for doing their job so well. When I was on Long Island, I also met with the National Guard. And the National Guard has been extremely useful in this horrible tragedy. They've been able to do door-to-door search and rescue, and they've actually taken seniors from their homes who hadn't eaten, who were very cold, and whose lives were now at risk. So as we have this nor'easter coming next week, we have to remain extremely vigilant about our neighbors. What's most inspiring about what I've seen in the last few days is the regular people helping their friends, neighbors, and people they've never met before. Yesterday in the Rockaways, across from the police station, a number of women realized they needed to do something about helping their friends, so they started a clothing drive. Within hours, they had hundreds of bags of clothing to distribute. They didn't know what to do with all the clothing they'd been able to collect overnight, and so they were working with FEMA to make sure they could house that clothing and bring it to some of the FEMA tents. Our biggest concern right now is making sure people know what resources are available to them. And because of the lack of electricity, they have no way to get that information. If you don't have electricity, you don't have a phone, you don't have television, you don't have a radio. Cell service is not as good as it needs to be. It is lacking across the state right now, particularly in the hardest hit areas. So what we have to do is leafleting. We're going door to door. The mayor has started a program. Local county executives have also started programs to get leaflets to individuals with where the FEMA tents are located, where the Red Cross shelters are, where they can provide information and support. And I think the biggest and most urgent crisis we're going to have over the next week is for those families that will not get power back this week, and some may not get power back for a very long time because their boilers are destroyed or their electrical systems are destroyed. They will need to be relocated, and we have to be able to find them housing. I was incredibly grateful that Secretary Napolitano visited Staten Island yesterday. I was grateful that Secretary Donovan visited the Rockaways yesterday. The federal government is standing ready, and President Obama has said over and over and over again there will be no red tape. And anything New Yorkers need, and folks from other states as well, in New Jersey and elsewhere, he will stand by them, he will provide for them, and there will be no red tape. That's the most important thing that Senator Schumer and I can do to help the governor and the mayor and all of the public servants sitting here with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. And as we go to the County Executive, Ed Mangano of Nassau, once again, it's important to point out on the numbers, Nassau has roughly twice the number of people without power that Suffolk, Westchester, or New York City has. So Nassau County really, just on the numbers, has the bulk of the problem now. And he's been doing a fantastic job, County Executive Ed Mangano.
Thank you, Governor. I can't tell you how appreciative we are of this top-down teamwork approach to crisis response, because that's what we have in Nassau County with respect to the power issue that is exasperating our recovery efforts. Problems with communication, people not understanding what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. We have transitional shelters issue. We're very concerned with people sheltering in place in houses without proper heat. We've already had fatalities from those trying to heat with propane grills and whatnot. Very serious situation going on in Nassau County, and it's this type of problem solvers that we need so we can cut through the typical bureaucratic red tape and get services and communication to our residents. We continue to be concerned about the public health and safety in Nassau County. We discussed today debris removal. Doesn't seem like it should be a top item. It is a top item as it is adding to a threat to our public health, and working on a plan to speed that up, as well as the needs of shelter, food, and information supply. So again, I want to thank all those at this table that really have contributed and will continue to contribute to a solution that's expedited, and that's why I thank you, Governor, again. And we'll continue to discuss. I could keep you here all day. We had a meeting for several hours. I've been talking to the governor every single day, meeting him every day. The state is an outstanding partner in this problem solving, and bringing the feds in and FEMA, I hope will provide the level of confidence to support the level of determination that our residents have in here in Nassau County to restore life as we once knew it in our great county. Thank you, Governor.
Well said, Ed. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Lieutenant Governor Bob Duffy, who's been doing a great job, Joe Loda from the MTA, who you've heard from all throughout this, Jerry Hauer, who's the head of runs the state emergency office, and County Executive Robert Astorino in Westchester, who's been doing great work. I'm going to be in Westchester today. And County Executive Steve Ballone, I was with him last night, Suffolk County, all doing a great work. Darrell Towns, who is our housing commissioner, who is going to be taking the lead on the housing, permanent and temporary housing program. So we thank them all very much. Questions? I don't know that you could have done more than we are doing. There was a storm. The storm damaged the system, damaged terminals, damaged refineries, knocked containers off freighters in the port, causing the Coast Guard to close the port because they were afraid of damaging other tankers by hitting these submerged containers. That was the situation. Storm caused damage. We have been working literally around the clock to repair the damage and find ways to get the system up and running, with some success, I might add. And the federal government has been very helpful. The Department of Energy on the federal side has been meeting with us and talking to us. Administrator Fugate has been working with us. They've redirected fuel tankers to the region. We have work crews with generators getting pipelines back up. We have the local distribution team of gasoline executives coming in here today. So everything that we can be doing, we are doing. But it is what it is, which is a great New York saying. There was a storm and a lot of damage.
Let me add to that. Every time there's an electrical outage, you have exactly the same thing. You can't get the gasoline to the gas stations or out of the tanks in the gasolines. In the gas stations, and every time you have that, the public wants to drive around with full fuel tanks rather than an average of half fuel tanks. And every time we're going to have an electric outage in any storm, you're going to have exactly the same thing, and it cures itself, and everybody, I'm convinced, has done everything they need to do to get it flowing again, and the public will now start using more mass transit, and we'll get more sanguine in saying it isn't worth waiting in line, I'll wait tomorrow, in which case there won't be lines tomorrow, and it sort of self-cures itself.
Governor and Mayor, aside from not driving as much as you should, aside from not hoarding gasoline, can you tell regular New Yorkers who are looking to give Should they be giving clothes, or do you have a service of them? Should they only be giving money? Tell people what they should do.
Well, the thing that is most useful, obviously, is money, because then we can direct it to the things that really have to get done. There is a demand for clothing. Canned goods, probably not. They're just more difficult to distribute, and we really, if we're doing that, we can't do the other things. There are a number of private groups that are trying to collect clothing, and that's fine, and they will distribute it, and it's useful, and they are really performing a service. But in the general sense, longer term, after you get over the next week or so, it is money that is going to give us the resources to help people put their lives back together.
Yeah, I would say money, because the money gives us flexibility to tailor the need for what a particular family may need. We're also reaching out to large corporations who have who can provide large quantities of basic commodities that these families are going to need. So, two levels. If individuals, I would say the best thing they can do is donate money. Large corporations that want to help, that have products that these families will need on a large-scale basis, by all means.
Joe, a question is, do you know what the situation is going to be like for tomorrow with the other trains? Any changes that you can announce now?
There'll be changes later on this afternoon. I can tell you that all of the numbered trains are up and running, except that the number 1 train is now terminating at 14th Street. We'd like it to, by morning, be able to go all the way down to Rector Street, and I think we'll be able to do that. But the 2, the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6, and the 7 are all operating. As the governor mentioned, we will not be operating with the normal amount of headways or how many trains are on the rails at any point in time. We are in uncharted territory here in bringing this system back, very different from what we had in Irene because of the amount of damage and the salt water in our system. We will do everything we can to get everyone there. I just ask everyone to be understanding, and also try to think about flex time and try to leave a little bit earlier or leave a little bit later. But tomorrow morning, as the governor mentioned, we will now also have students back in, some coming back to school, and as well as all the folks who are going to be out of their cars. There will be more announcements later today. We are been working through the night. We'll continue to work through the day and night to get the system running, but not back to normal. Every day it'll be a little more, and a little more.
Laura?
The mayor said yesterday that he thought LIPA was not being responsive enough in terms of restoring power in the Rockaways, and called the 2-week rough timeline for restoring power there unacceptable. Do you agree with that?
Well, let me say first, my responsibility is to get services for New York City. The governor's responsibility is to provide services for all of the LIPA region. So,
yeah, the LIPA serves the Rockaways, which is in New York City. LIPA also serves Nassau County, where you just heard Nassau has twice the problem any other county has, or the city. So I'm holding all the utilities accountable in every region. And again, we understand the storm. We understand. I am reasonable about it. I understand the circumstances. I understand what happened. I understand it's a catastrophic storm. I get it. I also understand they're professionals, and they get paid to do a professional job, and we expect performance. We expect that preparations were done. We expect that plans were made, and we expect power up and running. And we're going to hold them accountable. Why? Because they're not just a private company. They are a company that has received a charter, a license, a franchise from the state to provide this service. So I want them to provide the service that they get paid to perform. And we'll hold them accountable. We'll be reasonable, but we're going to hold them accountable, all of them.
Do you think, though, that a 2-week timescale for some of the hardest hit people in the Rockaways is reasonable?
I think you are, well, look, can you have a situation that requires a 2-week timetable? I suppose it is possible. You know, could you have a substation out and the transmission lines out and structural damage? I assume you could have a 2-week period for an engineering situation. I don't accept a 2-week period as any normal, reasonable whatsoever, however.
It's very different. If you have a power line goes down because of a tree in the suburban area, you come in, you fix it. Along the coast, the infrastructure is gone. Things that took months or years to build are gone. How quickly we can get it back, I'm not sure, but there will be certainly places that don't have power for a very long time.
Yeah, and what they're saying in Nassau, just remember what they're saying in Nassau and Westchester, which are basically, they're not coastal issues by and large. Nassau also has coastal issues, but the power outages are because the wind knocked down trees and limbs. Now they're saying yes, but there are so many trees and limbs and wires down that the volume is creating the problem. Look, yes, there's more lines down than usual, but this is not an unanticipated problem. This happens. This is what they do, and this is what they should have been prepared to do. Yes.
As regards the tens of thousands of people you were talking about who will need more permanent housing, I know it's early, but is there any way to get a sense of what those options might be?
We are exploring all options. Our first concern is to make sure that they have food, water, security, and ways to keep warm, as we at the same time are working on more long-term solutions. So there's two tracks. I don't know that anybody has ever taken this number of people and found housing for them overnight. My recollection is the numbers may have been the same in Katrina, but in Katrina, an awful lot of people left the city, remember, and went to Houston, which very generously accepted a lot of the people. And those people, most of them never went back to New Orleans. In this case, these people are staying in New York City, and it's a challenge for us, and we're working on it.
As Craig was kind enough to mention, I was the former HUD secretary, housing secretary. This is going to be a massive, massive housing problem. And you're going to need a number of options for a number of situations, short-term, long-term. So it's going to be a true challenge. We'll get through it, but it's a true challenge. Senator?
The problems in New York are different than in many other places. For instance, on Staten Island, there are very few hotel rooms. So where do you put people? Similarly, in the Rockaways and in the southern areas there. So what we've asked, and I've talked to Craig about this, we've asked for some real flexibility to understand two things. We have unique problems, and our costs of housing are much greater than anywhere in the country. And we need our federal administrator and all of them to be aware of that. I think the President is. But we may have to have some unique solutions here in terms of what's allowed for reimbursement, different than it is in the usual case.
It's an expensive market. Let's take one.
I spoke to Secretary Donovan about this specifically yesterday, and he is coming up with a proposal about how to begin to meet those housing needs, and it will require more flexibility. But he understands the volume. He actually fully understands this will be tens of thousands of people that may need to be relocated in the near future.
Let's take one more question because people have schedules, sir.
There's been a lot of talk from people in this room, from the governor, the senator, Jill Lota, about improving the infrastructure, looking at places like Europe, Asia, a lot of our global competitors, seawalls, things of that nature. Both before the storm and after, you said those kinds of measures seem to be impractical. I was wondering if you could explain specifically why.
Well, I don't know that it's practical to put barriers. You can do that at the mouth of the Thames River, but it's a very narrow area. There's no ways that I know of that you could put a barrier around Staten Island or the Rockaways. It would be very difficult and very expensive to just do it for New York Harbor. You'd have to do it for Long Island Sound, where a lot of the water comes down. But remember, most of our damage was done along a coastline. The answer there is to not build so close to the shore. People love to do that. Try to build it higher. Costs more money. And unfortunately, we've had this problem along the entire coast of the United States. People keep going back. They say they won't, but they go back and they rebuild in exactly the same places, and then they have another storm. Florida, North Carolina, all along that coastline, you can look at the examples. It is true you could have better prevention for big buildings. I've looked into whether that we could change the building code so that you could put your generators and fuel tanks on the roof rather than the basement, but the fire departments don't particularly care for that. There's a problem with everything. Con Ed has spent an enormous amount of money. We did not have outages because of the heat for the last 2 summers, but they did have one power station that flooded that took out half of lower Manhattan. With the exception of that, their problems are wires and trees, and there's no easy solution. The possibility of burying those wires is just prohibitively expensive.
But wouldn't, at least protecting the Upper Harbor, we could get gas in more easily because the ports would be open, lower Manhattan?
I don't know whether that's true or not. A solution just sitting here in this room is not the sort of thing you can spend years studying it. There have been plans to try to do that. The harbor has to be open to ships, and in fact most of the damage was not done up the harbor. It was done along the coastline, the Rockaways, Staten Island. Some damage in Brooklyn, some damage on the Brooklyn side of the harbor, but it's the big exposed areas that storms come in are along the coast, and there's no plan no strategy that I know other than not building there. Even when you build berms and jetties, unfortunately Mother Nature's pretty strong, and those tend not to be solutions to the problem.
Yeah. All right, that'll be the last question. We want to end by saying thank you to all New Yorkers for their patience and their spirit of community, and all the volunteers who have showed up to help. Thank you.